Welcome to the first of our videos for our small group work through the life of Swanbank Church. We know that some of you are brand new small groups that have just been set up, and we're delighted that we've got a number of new groups that are starting. While others of you have been together for many years, I know one group that's been together for 30 years, and we're so grateful that you're joining in with this whole church activity. There are 3 sessions that we're going to be offering by way of introduction, which will look at the key ideas that form the foundations for our small group work here at Swanbank. And those 3 sessions are, firstly, discipleship, secondly, community, and thirdly, mission. Our theme for today is discipleship, but we hope that our small groups will be a place where we are all able to deepen our discipleship, to build a greater sense of community, and to engage in relevant mission together. Some of you need to get to know each other. Some of you know each other very well indeed. But even those who know each other very well might never have asked this question. By way of just starting some conversation, I'd like to ask you to chat with your group and to share what your very favourite smell is. The best smell in the world. So I'm expecting you've had some really interesting responses to the best smell in the world, and perhaps some really funny ones as well. But I'm going to ask you guys to respond to that question. Sam, best smell in the world?
I love the smell of when a sponge cake has just come out of the oven.
Good
So
choice.
that first time you open the door and then bring it out. Lovely stuff. Yeah.
Are you sure?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I agree.
What are you
It's
unsure?
a good smell.
Well, I get what you're saying. I mean,
Yeah.
it's lovely, isn't it? But do you not think that sometimes it smells a bit eggy?
Bit eggy.
A bit eggy?
I've never experienced that.
Have you
I think
ever
that says
baked?
more about your baking than anything else,
Maybe
I
it does.
think.
Have you ever baked in a microwave?
Yes.
Cake? They smell eggy. Do you not think?
Great.
Okay.
Cool.
Fair enough. All right, Lauren.
Oh gosh, am I allowed 2?
Yes,
Can I
you
curve
can.
the rules this early
Sam
on in
couldn't have had 2,
proceedings?
but you can
Okay,
have 2.
thanks.
Good.
I've got a fairly standard one that I think actually a lot of people might have said, and I've got a curveball one.
Oh, we like a curveball.
My standard one.
Yeah.
You know, it's been really, really hot, then it rains. The
Yes.
smell of the rain on like the hot
That's an
surface.
excellent
There's
smell.
a posh word for it. I can never remember
Oh,
what it
you
is.
can't really describe it, can
No.
you? But we know what you mean.
That smell.
Yeah.
And the second one, I don't know why. Germaline. You know, like the cream you get if you get a cut. I
Yes.
walked into a table the other day, like
Yes.
grazed all down my leg. I had to go get some Germaline, and it just
Oh.
reminded me of how good that smell is.
That's
Wow.
weird.
Is it specifically Germaline, or is it things like Savlon and TCP as well, or
Oh
is
no,
it Germaline?
no, don't like TCP.
Oh, okay.
It's the Germaline,
Right.
Savlon-y smell.
Okay.
So you had something to say about my sponge cake, but when Lauren
Yeah.
pipes up with Germaline, you've got nothing at all. Great.
Well, Germaline doesn't smell eggy. What can I say?
Brilliant.
wanna
What
know
on
what-
earth is this connection? to
Right.
what we're
Okay.
doing?
What's
right.
yours?
Okay. So, best smells in the world, right? I think, and I'm pretty sure that almost every group, someone in almost every group will have said this, but
Okay.
it's one of my favourite smells in the world, and it is kind of similar to yours, but it is freshly baked bread.
Freshly baked bread.
It's fabulous, isn't it? Freshly
It's a great
baked
smell.
bread.
No eggs in sight either. No eggs in sight.
No
Doesn't
eggs.
smell eggy. No egg. And then, of course, you move on, don't you, to slicing it and then putting proper butter on and really good quality jam. That's just nothing better than warm bread.
Can't
I mean,
argue
I
with
can't
that.
argue
It's
with it.
good.
I
And I'm
can't.
pretty sure that someone in each group will have said it. Why am I talking about this? Well, our theme for today is discipleship. And when we think about discipleship, we think about some of the teaching of Jesus. And there's a part in the Bible, part of the I am sayings of Jesus, where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And as I was thinking about discipleship, this is the reading that really came to my mind that I think says some really deep truths about discipleship. So we're going to unpack that in our conversation in a moment. But I'd like to ask you to, in your groups, read from John's Gospel and read from John chapter 6, verses 35 to 59. John chapter 6, verses 35 to 59. So this is a really deep passage, I think. There's so much within that passage. Jesus talks about being the bread of life. And clearly he's teaching his disciples some really important lessons, I think, about who he is and about what that might mean for them as well. So what for you comes out in this passage, Sam?
I think because today is discipleship, that's what we're looking at today, there's something really powerful about that image of Jesus being the bread of life that speaks into our understanding of discipleship. So we understand discipleship as, well, the word disciple literally means to be a learner. So the disciples were people who were learning from Jesus. But if we use the image of the bread, then that goes a step beyond and moves almost towards Jesus being our sustainer, us like feeding off Jesus almost, and that being what Jesus was calling the disciples into was a life where Jesus was their sustainer, was the one that the disciples would sit at the feet at and learn from and then follow in the way of. But bread is such an essential thing for people, isn't it? And so trying to encourage the disciples to see Jesus as an essential thing for their living. They would have had an understanding of the manna that their ancestors would have experienced before, and Jesus references that in the passage.
Yes, he does earlier on in that passage.
But Jesus was talking about a different sort of experience here, and so Jesus, verse 35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So there's it's all that whole idea of sustenance, of feeding off of Jesus being the source of all that we need to live, I guess.
Okay. And that points us towards a really important truth of discipleship, isn't it? That we get to the place where we see Jesus as the very essence of what we need to be able to get through this life in a healthy way, actually. And Lauren, anything else that comes to your mind?
I think with the whole, the journey of this passage for me is really interesting in that we see bread being this really basic, necessary part of life, a real staple, something really, really tangible.
Yes.
And then we go through the bread being given out of a kid's lunchbox and being used to physically feed people. We get that callback, like Sam said, to the manna from heaven, of it being a spiritual gift of something to physically feed people.
Yes.
And now we find Jesus talking about a bread that's not going to feed someone physically, but is feeding someone spiritually. Yes. And that journey that the disciples go on as they are sat at his feet metaphorically and, in some instances in the Bible, very, very literally.
Yes.
As they take that journey from this not just being something that is happening to be now, but this is something that happens beyond the physical. I think it's a really interesting journey that they take as they journey through this period with Jesus.
Yeah. We find out that this struggle to understand what's going on here. I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight, don't we? So actually, when we look at this passage, we might look at it and see it as Jesus teaching them all those things that you've talked about, actually. But we also recognize a bit of a link to the life and the death of Jesus in here.
I think they go for this journey, don't they? So we've said you start with this very physical representation of bread. You then get this kind of spiritual concept of feeding.
Yes.
And then you get this weird mash together, which somehow sounds a bit like cannibalism.
Yes.
Yeah. And I imagine at that point, the disciples are going, okay, no, I'm okay with that. That bit's fine. Bit weird, but we've seen some miracles, so not too strange to what the heck is he talking about?
Yeah.
And we see that moment of conflict.
Yes.
That you're right, looking back on it kind of makes sense. We've
Yeah.
got a context to it.
Absolutely.
We can put it into context of our Sundays and our way of worshipping
Yes.
that they just didn't have
Yes.
at this point in their story.
Absolutely. And so this is Jesus starting to point towards actually the cross. He's starting to prepare them for the cross. But actually, understandably, how could they possibly get their heads around that at the time? And but what we see in here is some really really hard challenges about what it is if they want to be faithful, committed disciples. They want to be on a faithful, committed discipleship journey. Then Jesus is speaking into this as well, isn't he? Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, drink his blood, you have no life in you. What's going on here, and what do we understand?
We have the benefit of the whole story, don't we, to look at this passage with, and our experience of church, which will have involved some sort of communion.
Yes.
And so those words, when you have the bread, this is my body broken for you, and this is my blood shed for you. So there's an invitation here to share in the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And one of the ways we do that in the church is by taking communion. Reads very oddly for those people who were there and hadn't yet seen most of the life and the death and resurrection of Jesus at that point.
Yeah.
And so there's an invitation there, again, back to the image of the bread, to share in that which Jesus wants to feed us with.
Yes.
But there's a big question there about what it looks like for us to share in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. I don't know if you've got any wisdom about what that might look like.
I think when I think about this, another part of the Bible comes to my mind when the followers of Jesus are challenged, unless you take up your cross daily and follow me. That is the challenge that's given. That's what they're told is authentic, committed discipleship, taking up their cross daily and following Jesus. And so I find this quite hard to say because I realise I don't always live this. But actually, there is no place for half-hearted commitment when it comes to discipleship. If it is taking up our cross daily, then it's giving up everything in order to follow. Jesus, in his death, gave up everything, even his very life, in order to be obedient to the plan of salvation. So if we are to take up our cross, then authentic discipleship asks the same commitment of everything. Now, I say that really carefully because I know that there are times when my journey of discipleship is not wholehearted as it should be, and is partial and is imperfect. But that is the goal that we see here. This is the aim, that we share in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and the transformation of the cross and all that can mean in our lives.
Yeah. And that's the example we see from the disciples, isn't it?
Yeah.
They are not people who go in half-heartedly. Right at the beginning of the Gospels, we read of Jesus calling the disciples, and the disciples leaving their livelihoods, leaving their families in some cases, leaving all their sense of security and their identity from before they met Jesus, leaving all of that behind and saying, I'm going to give up all of that, I'm going to lay all that down because I'm all in for this guy, Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's the example, isn't it? It takes it on from a disciple just being a learner to being a follower, somebody who Jesus leads in his footsteps so that we might become more and more like him every day.
Yeah.
I think what we don't see, thankfully, for me anyway, is we don't see disciples who do that and then get it right for the entire journey.
Yeah.
Like, if you read beyond verse 59, if you read like 60 to 69, you see the response of the disciples to this moment of weirdness, this moment of challenge, this moment of real uncertainty. And you get those who throw their hands up and are like, I'm done.
Yeah.
This this is beyond now. I've listened, I've learned, I'm not following down that path. You get those who I imagine did that, and then we know because we read the rest of the book, come back.
Yes.
And then you get Simon Peter who says, I don't understand it, but I know who you are.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to follow you, Jesus.
Yeah.
And you see that model of discipleship not being about having all of the answers or blindly going.
Yeah.
You see that model of what we want small groups and home groups to be, of wrestling with the difficult bits of scriptures, of challenging each other with those whilst holding true to the fact that we know who Jesus is.
Absolutely. I think that's really important, because the truth is that there's much for us to wrestle with if we really want to get beneath the surface of what we find in our scriptures, to really dig deep and engage and try and understand how the Holy Spirit is speaking to us through the scriptures today. Then we need to be able to wrestle with the difficult questions and learn from each other in that, and rub off each other in that. But I love that phrase that you just said. We know who you are, Jesus. We know who you are, and at the heart of all that we are as Christians is the life of Jesus Christ, the death of Jesus Christ, the resurrection, and who He is. He is our model and our pattern for our discipleship, and so to be able to do the difficult stuff in community, I think, is really important. But to hold on to we know who Jesus is. And the hope is that as we do journey together in our small groups, as those who've been part of small groups over the years will know, that we do find ourselves honed in our discipleship as a consequence of the commitment to one another in our small groups. So there's much to take from this passage. I think our time's probably up. We hope that this has been a helpful conversation. We'd like to ask you in your small group now to go and to continue the conversation amongst yourselves. In order to help you to do that, we've got several questions that will come up on the screen. Use the questions in a way that's helpful for your group. Look at them all, look at one or two of them, see how far you get. And we hope that this will be a really helpful learning point for each one of us.